when you start DataLink Viewer, you see a Select Report tab and a Preview tab. A grid in the Select Report tab organizes and maintains information about previously opened reports. When you click on the Open button folder and select a report to open, it gets loaded into this grid. If you select multiple reports, they will all be loaded into the grid in one step. And the grid provides 6 columns of information about each report: the path to the report, the name of the RPT file, the title and the description, subject, type, and date last used within DataLink Viewer. You can group that grid. As you can see right now, it is grouped by the path column. And if it's grouped, you can also collapse and expand those groupings. To control how the grid is grouped, I'm going to drag the path column back into the grid. You simply drag a column header into the grouping area. And you can have multiple levels of grouping by simply dragging and dropping into the grouping area. Once a column is used as a grouping level, there's a good chance that you don't want to see it inside the grid, so I'm going to right-click and turn off the visibility for path. The name, title, and subject of a report gets loaded from the summary information for the RPT file, but you can override them, so you can type your own description. A type is another way of categorizing a report, so maybe the subject is profit, but the type is monthly report or daily report. And you can enter those things yourself, and they become categories within the drop-down once you do that. So here's the daily category that I just added. You can change the order of the columns by dragging and dropping them. And you can remove certain reports by simply right-clicking and selecting the option to delete the row from the grid. And you get a message that says this doesn't really delete the RPT file, it simply removes it from the grid. Double-clicking any of the rows within the grid would launch the report into the preview. You can also right-click any of the rows and select Preview Report as an alternative to double-clicking. You can force the report to be previewed in a separate window by selecting this option. You can force a login, and that is useful because sometimes you may want to switch the data source for the report on the fly, and DataLink Viewer allows you to select a different ODBC DSN, for example. You can elect to print the report without previewing it, and in this case it's going to go to the default printer, or you can elect to select a printer, and you can elect to export a report without previewing it. The reload button is useful in cases where a report is opened in both Crystal as well as DataLink Viewer. If you make a change in Crystal, save the report, and you want to reload the report to reflect those changes within DataLink Viewer, this button would do that for you. The Open Folder button allows you to select reports to be loaded into DataLink Viewer. Selecting multiple reports would load all of them into the grid. Selecting a single report would load just that report into the grid and launch the preview for that report. After you do that, if you go back to that button, it remembers the last used folder. Clicking on this button that looks like the Rubik cube opens up the options dialog. Under the Launch tab, Associated File Launch Mode controls what should happen when a user double-clicks an RPT file using File Explorer. Should they see a view only, a very simple window that simply previews the report, or should the full GUI, including the Select Report tab, appear? Save Data action, by default the user is going to be prompted if a report has saved data and asked, do you wish to refresh the data or do you wish to see the saved data? These two other options would default to either automatically refresh the data or automatically display the saved data. Enable integrated authentication. If that option is turned on, the login dialog will have a Remember Me checkbox. Let me show you what that checkbox would look like. Here it is, the Remember Me checkbox. Let me cancel out of that. And back to this dialog. So when this is turned on, if a user is successful in logging in, then the login information is going to be stored inside DataLinkViewer.ini file, which is just a text file that sits inside the DataLink Viewer application folder. And within that text file, there's a variety of options, but the integrated authentication includes, for a user who successfully logged in, their user ID, their Windows machine ID, and then an encrypted string that would allow DataLink Viewer to run the report without asking the user to enter login information again. Now, if another user tries to log into the same machine, that encrypted information is not going to be available to them. In other words, it is tied very tightly to the fact that the same user ID on the same machine has successfully logged in into Windows, and hence can be credited with using this login information that was stored encrypted for them. Here is the login dialog provided by DataLink Viewer. If a report uses ODBC as its data connection method, then DataLink Viewer allows us to switch on the fly from one ODBC DSN to another for that report. All you need to do is click on this button, and DataLink Viewer presents the current ODBC DSN for the report and allows us to switch to any other. This last option under the Launch tab, if you turn it on, then a double click on a report row inside the grid would launch the report into a separate window, a view-only window. And that allows you to launch multiple reports and have all those windows open at the same time. I'm going to skip the information inside the Parameter tab because those options are a bit esoteric. But under the file locations, imagine two main scenarios. You may install DataLink Viewer on Citrix and wish to give each user their own individualized settings, things that live inside DataLinkViewer.ini, and their own grid in the first tab of DataLink Viewer, the grid that shows the reports that they want to maintain. The opposite could happen as well. You may want to install DataLink Viewer on each local machine, but point all the users to share a centralized report list.txt that you maintain for all of them, so they all have the same list of reports and the same style for the grid in terms of how it's grouped, which columns are visible, and so on. So these two options allow you to control that. If it's a Citrix installation, you can give each user their own home folder location for DataLinkViewer.ini. And if it's local installations of DataLink Viewer that should point to a shared location for the report list, you can place the report list.txt in a shared location, give the users a read-only access to it, give yourself full permission on it, and then you maintain that report list for everybody. This option allows you to log DataLink Viewer use to a text file. And it will include what Windows user ID, on what Windows machine ID, ran which report, on what date, when did it start, when did it end, and so on. A more advanced logging is available through ODBC. So the user manual describes a structure for a table that needs to be called DLV_log. And if you have such a table in the database that you have access to via ODBC, then you can select that ODBC DSN. If there's a need, put user ID and password. And from that point on, DataLink Viewer would log processing to that centralized database. And there's a lot more detail in that case, such as what parameter values were used, did the user print the report, did the user export the report, and a lot more. This paper scroll button launches the user manual inside Microsoft Word. There's a detailed table of contents that you can use, and towards the end, there's a section that describes what has changed and enhanced in each release. This button allows you to convert RPT files to RPZ files. The idea is that if I select this particular report and select Open, DataLink Viewer has created an RPZ file that behaves within DataLink Viewer just like an RPT file, except that it cannot be exported to a Crystal report format or to a report definition format. And that way you can protect your intellectual property. You can create reports that you then sell, deliver to your users, and they cannot open them up in Crystal. So they cannot change the design, they cannot figure out how you designed them. But within DataLink Viewer, they run just like any other Crystal report. So you keep the RPT to yourself, you give your users the RPZ files. Let me show you what it looks like to open an RPZ file. It's really a non-event because it behaves exactly like a regular report. Here is the RPZ file that we just created. I'll select it. I'm going to say I don't want to refresh the data. Here it is. It looks just like any other RPT file. I can interact with it exactly like I interact with any RPT. This info button gives you version information for DataLink Viewer. In this case, it's 5.9002 using the 11 or the XI Release 2 Crystal runtime components. If it says 8.5 here at the end, it's Crystal 8.5 runtime components. 9.0 would be Crystal 9, and 12 would be Crystal 2008 or Crystal 12. This button checks for online updates against my server. This wizard would take you through some steps. It would check if there's a new version. If there is, it would prompt you for a password. You will receive that password from me via email if you're still under support for DataLink Viewer. Under the Preview tab, a toolbar allows you to do all the typical things that you can do within Crystal. You can export the report, select an export format, an export destination. I'll just cancel out of that. Print the report. Turn on the group tree or turn off the group tree, scroll through the pages of the report, refresh the report. Here there's some unique things that DataLink Viewer allows you to do, such as automatically refresh the report every n seconds, prompt to change the value of just some parameters. For example, I'll change just the from date so that instead of January 1st, 2002, I'll elect to have 2003, February 1. And you can see that that's now reflected in the from date parameter. You can add select expert conditions using the new button here. You can similarly change search conditions using the select expert. You can search for text. I'll search for Suyama, and you can see that that text was found here. And you can change the zoom level. So all of these things, except maybe the refresh button, which is more advanced, are quite familiar from Crystal dialogues. When you click the refresh button, DataLink Viewer allows you to keep the current parameter values, automatically refresh the report every n seconds, or prompt for new parameter values. When you select that option, DataLink Viewer populates a grid with a list of all the parameters, the current values, and you can elect to change just one or some of them. So unlike other viewers where you're forced to answer the prompts for all the parameters, you can be selective about which parameters you want to change. If I select the from date parameter, which currently is January 1st, 2001, I can see that reflected on the report layout. If I click OK, I get a dialog just for that parameter, and I can change it to 2002 as an example, and now the report refreshed and I can see 2002. To make things even easier on the users, DataLink Viewer remembers the refresh parameter dialog status as of last time the report ran, even if it was several days ago. So I can see that the same parameter is highlighted and that the dialog remembers that I wish to prompt for new parameter values. DataLink Viewer supports the dynamic and cascading parameters of version XI and above, but beyond that, it also provides dynamic and cascading parameter functionality for any Crystal Reports version. And the way it implements it is by allowing you to use other reports as parameter dialogues. So I'm starting this report, and you can see that in here, within this dialog, what gets rendered here is actually another Crystal report that returns all the possible years, all the possible order years in our database. And I can click on that report to select a different value. If I click OK, I get here a listing of product types. And again, I can click to select values, or I can remove some of these values. And this is a cascade whereby this product type selection controls what products are shown. So competition and helmets are selected here. I click OK, and I can see only the products that belong to competition and helmets. And again, I can delete all of these selected values and select those that I want. As you can see, the parameter dialogs remember the values from the prior sessions. And if I click OK, I get the report. So now the question is, how do we actually implement this? So let me switch to Crystal and show you how that works. So here's the main report, and the key is that the parameters for this main report, one is the year choice and the other one is the product choice, are named as other Crystal reports. So the year prompt is really prompt order year version 11.rpt, which looks like this. Here's the report. And all it does, it groups by the year of the order date. In fact, I can view it. You can see that's what that parameter dialog showed us before. If I go back to the main report, let's look at the prompt products version 11.rpt. And that particular report has its own parameters. So that's how the cascade is achieved. The report that is used as a parameter has its own parameter. And in this particular case, that parameter is also dynamic and shows a listing of product types. This is much more flexible than Crystal alone, because any prompt or any parameter within that cascade can be of any type. In Crystal, a dynamic cascade of parameters has to all use dynamic parameters. While here, this particular parameter could be a static parameter, a type-in parameter. So you can mix and match with more flexibility. Here's a demonstration of how a double click inside a report section within DataLink Viewer can launch another report and pass parameter values to it. You place a formula that starts with dlv_run:-v, the path to the report, and then you can pass parameter values. In this case, we pass only a single parameter value, and we dynamically concatenate the string within the formula expression so that when we're in the competition product type, we include competition here. When we're under helmets, we pass helmets. So let's go back to competition, double-click this report section, and voila, we have a product catalog for competition. And I can close this one, go to helmets, double-click that section, and I will see a catalog for helmets. And one key advantage for this functionality is that unlike on-demand sub-reports within Crystal, where yes, you can click and get the on-demand sub-report, these reports that we're calling from within DataLink Viewer are actually main reports. We're just launching them, and so they can contain within them their own sub-reports. This is something you cannot do with on-demand sub-reports within Crystal, because an on-demand sub-report cannot contain a sub-report. This sample report demonstrates, among other things, the in-place drill-down functionality in DataLink Viewer. I can click once on this plus sign for competition and get detail below it. I can expand King and Avolio. I can expand another product type. I can collapse and expand again competition, and it remembers the detail that was collapsed or expanded below it. And the advantage of this approach is that you get detail in the higher level context of the whole report. You can still, of course, do the regular drill down, whereby a double click on a group header gives you a separate tab with information just for that group. DataLink Viewer allows you to set the value of one formula when you click on another. Here's one demonstration of what can be done with this functionality. I have three formulas here that have as their values the text detail, crosstab, or both. And when I click on crosstab, it sets the value of another formula to crosstab. And that formula controls the suppress condition of several sections within the report. So if I click on crosstab, the report hides the detailed sections and shows just the crosstab. If I click on both, I get both the crosstab and the detail. And if I click detail, I'm back to seeing just the detail without the crosstab. The user manual describes how you need to name your formulas so that a click on this formula would know to set the value of another one. Here's another example of what can be achieved with the functionality of clicking on one formula to set the value of another one. These 5 formulas control the value of the level 1 grouping formula, and these 5 formulas control the level 2 grouping formula. And I can click on, let's say, country at level 1, and immediately the level 1 grouping changes to country. That is reflected here. I can change the level 2 to year, and it is again reflected both here on the report canvas as well as in the title. And all of those changes occur without hitting the database again. So we saw how we can click on the show formulas, the 3 formulas here, and change from crosstab to detail or both. And similarly, we can click on some formulas to change what we're grouping on. Let's turn on the visibility just for the crosstab and see the effect of changing grouping information. Within the crosstab, the columns are driven by the level 2 grouping, and the rows are driven by the level 1 grouping. So if I keep the columns as year and change the rows to employee, I can immediately see that I changed the information to year and employee. Product type, country, or product. And of course I can change also the level 2 of the columns. I can switch to product types here or employee. I can also combine that with changes of the metric. So if I click on the profit parameter, it toggles to revenue, and now the crosstab shows revenue information. So the combination of all of those effects is that you get a slice and dice functionality that approaches what you can do with Excel pivot tables. When a user clicks on a parameter, DataLink Viewer assumes that they want to change the value of that parameter. So, for example, we have one parameter that controls how many detailed rows we're showing. This is this parameter. If I click on it, I get a simple input box, and I can change it to 5, hit enter, and now I get 5 detail rows. If I want to control how many top level nodes I see, I can just click on this node. Instead of 5, change it to 8, and I get 8 product types. So that's the behavior with a single value parameter that allows custom values and doesn't have more than one default value. What happens if there is more than one default value? One special case is a binary parameter that allows only 2 default values and no custom values. It's kind of a toggle parameter. In this case, this is a parameter that controls whether profit or revenue are shown. So if I click on it once, it changes immediately to revenue. If I click on it again once, it changes back to profit. Same thing with this, expand or collapse. Single click, all of them are expanded. Another single click, all of them are collapsed. And with a little bit of creativity, you can do a lot of different interesting things with this, such as controlling what sections are displayed. So instead of having 3 possible values, like in this case, where I'm using formulas to control whether I'm showing crosstabs, detail, or both, you can use this approach with a 2-value parameter to just toggle between show a lot of detail or not detailed, show crosstab or not, and so on. So I'm going to go back to just the detail view. What about a case where a parameter has more than 2 default values? This is this case where I control the product class, and I can just double-click bicycles, and now I see only bicycles. I can double-click accessories. I can see only accessories now, or back to all. So that's a case of more than 2 default values, and if there's lots and lots of default values, such as this case, just for demonstration purposes, it gets you a dialog with up to 25 values, and the rest you can scroll, and you can again double-click one of them, and it changes to that value. What about dates? If I click on a date parameter, I get a nice date dialog, and I can select a different date by just double-clicking on the calendar. I'm going to double-click 18th of January, and it has changed. I can, while I'm selecting the calendar, I can move around using the arrows. I can select another month. I can use page down or page up to move between months. I can do control page down to go to higher level years, or control page up to go to lower level years. And of course, I can also enter the values directly. So 3/3/2001, and I can go back to that year. These are all specific cases. What happens if the parameter doesn't fall into one of these cases? Then it's exactly like when you click on such a parameter, it's exactly like clicking on the refresh button and selecting the option to change just that parameter, in which case you will get a parameter dialog that is the typical default crystal dialog just for that parameter when you click on it.